So once again, thank you, and I'd like to introduce my boss and dear friend, Irina Nevzlin, and Eylon Levi.
Hello.
Hi. Is it working? It's working.
This one's working.
As a nice host, I would like to start, and I want to thank all of you for coming. I cannot imagine how exhausted some of you are after flying.
You're exhausted.
And I know how important it is for you to be here. I also want to thank Eylon. We had this conversation before. I don't think there is one single person in this room who is not saying thank you to you every day that we see you appearing on TV. No, honestly. Israel was never fantastically good, and we'll talk about that in its public relations, and you seem to be fixing it very quickly, so thank you. We want to have a short conversation about Jewish identity, about the role of diaspora. We're both diaspora Israeli, and we want to have a little bit of conversation of the role of diaspora, in security and security of the Jewish people. And we want to have it not long because we want to give you a chance to touch the history and see the codex. So I want to start with asking you, if you don't mind, you are Israeli, British, born, proudly Jewish, from London, right? Do you feel that there is a change in how you feel yourself and how you identify yourself after the 7th of October?
Wow, that's an excellent question. And while I think of the answer, let me just say I'm very happy to be here at the home of the Codex Sassoon. The last time that I visited this museum was before it acquired the Codex Sassoon, when it was in Israel for, 10 days? A very brief exhibition. And I came here like a child visiting Willy Wonka's chocolate factory with this awesome sense of trepidation to look at this very, very old book. These are the things that excite me. And I remember standing above it and seeing all the people who were crowding around it, mouthing the words to themselves as they were almost surprised that they could read a text that was 1100 years old. And not only read it, they knew whole sentences by heart. And I thought to myself, if Israel, the Jewish people, do not acquire this book and it gets sold at Sotheby's to some Saudi sheikh, okay, and just disappears like that Da Vinci painting, the state of Israel has no right to exist. We are here because we keep not only the Jewish people safe, but Jewish heritage and culture safe and provide a home for it. And I left thinking, I really hope someone is trying to get the money from some generous Jew in the world to get the book. And when the news broke that Anu had successfully purchased the book at Sotheby's, I thought, look, I don't need to tell you what a difficult year we had in Israel last year. I was like, finally, good news, okay? It was like my one good news story of the year. So I'm really happy that it's found a home here. October 7th was a slap in the face and a punch in the gut, and I don't think we've begun as a society to internalize what it means that we experienced a mini Holocaust on the soil of the sovereign state of Israel.
But on the personal level, though, sorry.
Definitely, because on a personal level, I've found myself suddenly propelled into this position of influence and prominence that I didn't have before. When the massacre erupted, I was a private citizen and was looking at things from the perspective of an ordinary citizen. And suddenly I find myself in the most bizarre, horrific, tragic, and bizarre circumstances, having a voice and traveling to Jewish communities around the world to try to give them strength and finding myself strengthened by them in turn. And it has definitely been a moment, I think, for a lot of Jews around the world where they looked around at the enlightened world and realized it was actually a darker place than they thought. for me as well. Thoughts about what the rest of the world was like, about alternatives to living in Israel, in the big wide world that is waiting out there for us. Suddenly it looked very different. And all of us, I think, realized who our friends are, who our people are, what we believe in, what we're fighting in, and who stands against us, and what the cost is of standing against us, and what that means. So absolutely, for me, it was... I mean, I know so many stories of people who've started wearing Magen Davids or putting on tefillin or lighting Shabbat candles, and these stories are a dime a dozen. But definitely for me, having that much more grounded, rooted sense of history and historic responsibility within the story of Jewish history, absolutely.
Yeah, I can very much relate to that. I said it, I think, to a couple of people here. I've been living in Israel. I made Aliyah 18 years ago. Made it from London, actually. And
good move.
And then
you made Brexit too.
Oh my God, I hated that thing. And then for me, when I was thinking about my identity, anybody who knows me will know that the first thing I'll say will be Jewish. It will not be the male or female. It will not be anything, but it will be Jewish. That's the first thing how I identify myself. And on the 7th of October, when I understood that we're not going to Bruno Mars concert anymore, and that there's other things happening, by the evening, I was more Israeli than I was Jewish. And it was such a big change. And I always felt very Israeli. I never felt, it was never a conflict, but then it switched. Now, and it was a very interesting, I didn't expect it because I thought I was so fully already, I always felt at home here. Now, I want to, and I invite you all to also participate. I agree completely that we kind of have this idea now of talking about concepts which were wrong. And this is and they were wrong. The concept about what Hamas is actually doing and how much they want to build a thriving society. But I also think we have a couple of other beliefs which are, we can call them wrong concepts. And the reality check was tough. And one of them was that the world is much darker, as you said, place. The second place was, I think we intuitively didn't feel the level of anti-Semitism present everywhere around the world.
Israelis have no idea. I came back from the United States now. I was shocked to hear a woman in New York telling me she's pulling her kids out of school and taking them to Connecticut because she has kids scribbling swastikas in their exercise books. I had people on campus telling me that on their anonymous campus feeds they're getting called Dirty Jew. It's worse than I thought, and I thought I was following the story closely.
But did you feel in London, were you as much surprised in London as were people in America to find out that level of anti-Semitism? I mean, what I don't understand is, were we all unaware? I mean, this is a chronic disease, right? This is a chronic disease. It raises when something happens, 7th of October, Corona, you name it. There's this below the surface hate. I'm sorry to say that there's this hate. But how is it possible that we all were surprised?
Because we see a big movement that has mobilized against Israel, and it's not always obvious why, even though we know it intuitively, why it is the modern instantiation of anti-Semitism now. I remember a decade ago as a student making this case of anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, but it's not since October 7th that a few things have really slotted into place. It's not just that the people calling for the destruction of the state of Israel have no care or regard for the safety of the Jewish people in what a Palestine from the river to the sea would look like. I think there are two additional details that, personally, I hadn't analyzed before the war. The first is the way that the anti-Israel struggle has interlocked with so many other causes that taken together they make the claim that Israel is everything that's wrong with the world, and if you solve Israel, you solve the world's problems. Israel is not only a problem of Middle East peace, it's a climate justice cause, and a social justice cause, and a black rights cause, and an LGBT cause, and an animal rights cause. I don't know whether anyone's claimed it's an animal rights cause, but they'll get to it eventually. And so the result of saying, all of these different causes. Israel is what? It's a reproductive justice cause. Since when has being pro-Hamas rapist meant being pro-reproductive justice? It makes no sense. But when you take all these different positions and say, okay, Israel is what is at the center of all these things that are wrong with the world. And if you solve the Israel problem, Jewish problem, you solve all the problems of the world. Classic anti-Semitic thinking. And the other is the model that says anti-Semitism, or anti-Judaism, as David Nirenberg calls it in that seminal piece of scholarship that I recommend, has always been about other societies holding a mirror up to themselves and using Judaism to define whatever they are not. If we are capitalists, they are communists. If we are communists, they're capitalists. If we are rootless cosmopolitan liberals, they're nationalists. If we're nationalists, they're rootless cosmopolitans. And now you have a whole movement in the UK, the US, Australia, Canada, who say that the original sin of the modern world is colonialism. So instead of taking responsibility and saying, well, the logical conclusion is we have to dissolve our own countries to make amends for colonialism, they take a story of a multi-ethnic, multicultural country formed of refugees from places where they were persecuted, returning to their ancestral homeland. And they spin a story that this is in fact a form of colonialism. Because then you don't have to take responsibility for the sins of your own society. You get to say, we get to scapegoat them. And in those two forms, you find a pattern of traditional anti-Semitic thinking that to me was not obvious before October 7th. I've been on a journey of discovering that as well.
No, absolutely. And I have to say that I was always an optimist, and living in diaspora and living in London, and I always said people have to make sure that they live in the democratic society, because I come from Russia, which is, as you know, very democratic. It has elections nowadays. And for me, it was always clear that any place where you can celebrate your identity will be fine. So there is a certain level of chronic anti-Semitism. It's there, but it's something which is not really, it can't flare up to the levels. Now, I think that brought us to a wrong concept, and in no way I'm going to criticize the current government during the war and having you on the stage. But I think it's a concept that has been with us for many, many governments. And that is, have you seen people who were suggested positions of diaspora ministry or Asbara ministry? So those ministers were considered to be very kind of little and non-influential, where in fact I think that, thank God it's not, but would I be a prime minister of this country, I will say that
making a sales pitch right here.
That's something that I've been thinking for a very long time. You see, the diaspora, the strength of diaspora is the strength of Israel. The strength of diaspora, what you were talking about, and visiting the communities, they need to give the strength. Our security depends as much on the diaspora as it depends on the strength of the army. However, for some very strange reason, because of maybe a concept which was, we wanted to believe the world is better, and we're not blaming anyone. I wanted to believe the world is better myself. I was a proud Jew wearing a Magen David in London, and we're here sitting in a museum which celebrates Jewish identity. But ultimately, the role of diaspora in the life of Israel and the role of Israel in the life of diaspora has to be the priority for any government going forward, because I think it's clear, very clear now, that when something like that happens, we suffer, all of us, on physical level, on any level. And the question is, how do we take it forward, this realization that the world is not as, as you said, enlightened is a good word, as we want it to be. And also, what I'm worried about is how do we stay with the reality check. So we are now, you very rightly said, we are in a trauma, and we didn't even start to process that. We're, I think, just adjusting to living through the trauma, because I think unless the hostages are back, or at least there's some symbolic, and not only symbolic, end to this war, we won't start processing the grief. So how do we not forget? How do we take it forward? Because it's so much better to live in the world which is not so bad. How do we make decisions remembering that place?
Look, first of all, the diaspora is absolutely critical. And I'll say a credit to the current diaspora minister, Amichai Shikli. His ministry has very generously funded the podcast that I've launched now as an official spokesman. It's called State of a Nation. Subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
I hear a sales pitch here.
The idea is where I, as a spokesman, go to be briefed by the experts who know what they're talking about. And so the idea is to give the pro-Israel world briefings, basically, the information they need in a format that people enjoy consuming the content, which is podcasts. So the Diaspora Ministry has very generously funded that, as against matching funding. We're currently fundraising to make sure that this whole operation can take off, but we've launched the first 10 episodes, and we're very hopeful that if everything falls into place, we'll be able to continue this. I hear from so many solidarity missions that come to Israel. We came here to give you strength, and we're leaving strengthened. And I felt the same thing when I was in America on a Hasbara tour just now in New York. I came to give strength and to give the diaspora a kick up the backside. And I left with so much more fire in my belly. There is an incredible diaspora awakening that is happening now, of people who supported Israel before and people who didn't, and suddenly realized where their place is and where they have to be. And I had lunch in New York with Deborah Messing, who is an absolute modern-day Queen Esther. And I mean modern-day Queen Esther because it only struck me, Queen Esther had the opportunity to keep her head down and say, oh no, I'm part of the royal court now. They can go kill all the Jews. This will pass me by. But she stuck her neck out and said, I'm willing to pay a personal price because this is the moment. And Deborah Messing's doing the same thing. We're seeing that across the diaspora. And I was in Atlanta for the Hillel International Summit for students. And I gave them a speech about what it means to make Gen Z Gen Zionist. I had a special t-shirt designed saying Gen Zionist. We're still working on how we scale it up. It was generally supported by the Israel on Campus Coalition. And I said, being a Zionist has always been about standing up to the bullies. And the bullies have come out in force. And we need you to stand up to them and don't get pushed around and don't allow yourselves to be called names. Because I said, look, you want to make Aliyah? Great. I'm in favor, okay? Life is more colorful under the Mediterranean sun. Come make Aliyah. Don't buy just holiday homes here. Make Aliyah, okay? But if you want to stay in America, there is nothing more Zionist than to fight for your place and to fight for your voice, because we need you to make the world safe for Israel so that Israel can make the world safe for the Jews. And we cannot afford to lose the diaspora and say, it's okay, all the Jews can come to Israel. I'm a Zionist. Jews should they want to make Aliyah? Come. But the world will not be a good place for the Jews if all the Jews leave and we try to pretend that we're in this fortress in the land of Israel. We need strong and powerful Jewish communities around the world to make the world safe for Israel so that we can make the world safe for the Jews.
Could have said it better. Thank you so much. I will only say one sentence before I let you go and enjoy the Codex and maybe cry at the 7th of October exhibit.
I came here for the night at the museum, but I have to perform in order to get a ticket. You just got a ticket straight in.
No free lunch.
No free canapes either.
I would love to say that the reason this museum exists is exactly for this reason. You need really strong Jewish identity and strong connection to your roots to be able to stand up. That's exactly why we built the museum, because you can choose to live here, you can choose not to live here. That's a very personal choice. If you don't choose to be proud and fight, that's when we're done. So that's why we're here today.
Can I make a final point before we wrap up? This is an interesting point that we have in common as diaspora Jews who are now Israelis. A political strategist, Arthur Finkelstein, famously said in the 90s when he was advising the current prime minister on his campaign, if you ask people in this country whether they identify more as Jews or Israelis, their answer will tell you where they fit on the political map. If they say they feel more Jewish, they're on the right. If they say they're more Israeli, they're on the left. And the reason is because Israelis regard being Jewish as the more restrictive, narrower identity. So you ask people on the right and they say, I'm Jewish, I'm not Israeli. I don't believe in this big civic identity. I believe in our subsection of society. Left-wing people will say, I don't believe in this narrow, restrictive identity. Being Israeli expands my identity. But Olim Chadashim and Olim Vatikim break this rule because we see being Jewish not as the restrictive identity, but as being the expansive identity. And by identifying as being Jewish first rather than being Israeli, we connect to a much bigger story and sense of peoplehood around the world than just being, oh no, I belong to only this section that lives within the state of Israel. And that's why it's so important to strengthen and reinforce that Jewish identity, because it isn't just the narrow identity of the majority ethno-religious community in Israel. It's a much broader identity connected geographically, historically, on a much broader continuum.
Roots. It's your roots. It's your roots, and in all its entirety.
Our roots and our branches around the world as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irina.
Thank you.